By noon, the wagon wheels had begun to complain louder than the horses. Every turn of the dry axle sent a long wooden groan across the flats, and Clara Sterling felt each vibration through the bench before she heard it with her ears. The road into Ocotillo Wells ran over pale gravel, red dust, and shelves of buried limestone that held the day's heat like banked coals. Elias sat beside her with both hands locked around the reins. He had not spoken since morning. A dark stain spread between his shoulder blades, and every few minutes he touched the inside pocket of his vest, as if money might have returned there by miracle. Clara did not ask what waited in town. She had learned during 3 years of marriage that Elias became most dangerous when he was ashamed. He lied when he was hopeful, blamed when he was frightened, and turned cruel when the two met. For the last month he had been leaving their rented cabin after supper and returning near dawn with the smell of whiskey, lamp smoke, and gaming rooms in his clothes. 2 nights before, he had told her they were going to Ocotillo Wells to meet a buyer for an old mining claim. The story had sounded thin even then. Now, as the town appeared ahead in a haze of heat, she felt his fear through the floorboards in small, irregular tremors. The earth beneath them carried a different message. Clara pressed 2 fingers against the wagon plank. Somewhere east of the road, a deep seam of rock answered the weight of the wagon with a muted pulse. Far below that seam, something moved. Not much, not near the surface, but enough to tell her that water still existed in this country, held in dark places under stone, while men above argued over empty wells. Her father had once called that sensitivity an uncommon talent. He had been a surveyor who taught her to use a compass before she could embroider a straight line. When she was a child, he would let her walk barefoot around camps after rain and ask where the ground felt heavy. She learned to notice things other people missed: a faint change in echo beside a rock wall, a cooler breath from a crack in limestone, a vibration that traveled farther through solid granite than through loose shale. After his death, the same gift became something neighbors whispered about. Elias had first treated it as a charming oddity. Later, when her warnings contradicted his prospecting schemes, he called it illness. The wagon rolled to a stop outside Jedediah Thorne's trading post. The building leaned into the wind, its porch roof patched with mismatched boards. A mule slept beside a hitch rail. Somewhere behind the building, a pump handle squealed without producing water. Elias jumped down and tied the horses without looking at Clara. "Come on," he said. That was all. Inside, the air was cooler but worse. Tobacco smoke hung beneath the rafters. Burlap sacks of corn gave off a sweet, spoiled smell. A pot of coffee had cooked down to tar on a stove near the rear wall. 4 men sat around a scarred card table, and behind them Sheriff Silas Vance rested one boot on an empty chair. Vance wore his badge, polished bright enough to catch the narrow beam of sun coming through the shutters. Everything else about him seemed deliberately dull. Brown vest, dusk-gray trousers, a face weathered into hard folds. His eyes moved first to Elias and then to Clara. That second look lasted too long. Clara understood before Elias sat down. Vance picked up the deck. "You brought the balance?" Elias cleared his throat. "I brought enough to settle one way or another." Jedediah, standing behind the counter, went still. His expression shifted when he saw Clara, not surprise, regret. Clara remained near the wall. The planks under her boots told her the post had been built over a shallow hollow in the limestone. She could feel the room in layers, the weight of the stove near the back, the horses shifting outside, a man tapping his heel under the table, Elias drumming 2 fingers against his thigh. Mapping spaces calmed her. It gave shape to danger. The first hand went badly for Elias. The second went worse. Vance dealt without hurry, talking about freight rights and mining permits while Elias bet coins that Clara had never seen in their house. When the small pile in front of her husband disappeared, he produced a folded deed. Vance examined it, smiled faintly, and put it aside. Clara's mouth went dry. That deed belonged to the last parcel inherited from her father, a narrow strip of useless-looking land north of their cabin. Elias had sworn he had never touched it. "You forged my name," she said. Elias looked over his shoulder, his face flushed. "Not now, you forged my name." Vance glanced between them with mild amusement. Seems the signature was close enough for the recorder. Clara looked at Jedediah. He lowered his eyes. Elias pushed his chair back halfway, then stopped when Vance placed 2 fingers on the deed. "Sit." Vance said. Elias sat. There were moments when a marriage broke with shouting, a slammed door, a fist, a confession. Clara's broke quietly. It broke in the way her husband obeyed another man more quickly than he had ever listened to her. It broke in the forged curl of her name at the bottom of a paper. Most of all, it broke because Elias was not embarrassed that he had betrayed her. He was embarrassed that she had noticed. Vance dealt again. By late afternoon, Elias had lost the claim, the wagon, and both horses. One of the drifters had left. The other two watched with the hungry attention of men who had no stake in the outcome, but enjoyed ruin when it belonged to someone else. Jedediah slid a stool toward Clara. "You ought to sit down, Mrs. Sterling." Before she could answer, Elias snapped, "She's fine where she is." The words cracked across the room. Clara did not flinch. She watched his hand move toward his neck. A leather cord disappeared under his collar. He pulled it free and broke the knot with his teeth. A silver wedding band dropped into his palm. His band. For a second he stared at it as though it had betrayed him too. Then he put it on the table. "One more stake." Vance leaned back. "That ring won't cover what you owe." Elias licked his lips. "It isn't only the ring." The room changed. Clara felt it before anyone spoke. Jedediah inhaled sharply. One man stopped shuffling his boots. Vance's gaze drifted toward her. Elias kept his eyes on the cards. "You've heard the talk about my wife." Clara's hands became cold. "She can find seams nobody else can," he continued. "Water, ore, hollows, and rock. She hears things, feels them, whatever you want to call it." "Elias," Clara said. He spoke faster. "She found a spring for old Mercer when every well in his valley was dry. She pointed out a rotten shelf in the Copper Queen shaft before it came down. She can do it again." Vance's mouth changed into something that was not quite a smile. "What exactly are you offering?" he asked. Elias finally looked at Clara. She had seen him frightened before. She had seen him drunk, desperate, jealous, sick, tender on rare mornings, and vicious on rarer nights. She had never seen this particular expression. It was relief. He had reached the edge of his own ruin and discovered a door through her. "My debt," he said. "Cleared. In exchange for her service until you decide it's paid." Jedediah swore under his breath. Clara stared at her husband. "I am not yours to wager." Elias flinched but did not withdraw the offer. Vance turned the ring with one finger. "Law says a husband has rights to household labor. Law does not say I am a poker chip. This is faro." One of the drifters muttered. Nobody laughed. Vance rose. He was larger standing, his shoulders nearly filling the space between table and wall. "No one said anything about ownership, Mrs. Sterling. Your husband owes money to men who are less patient than I am. He's offering a practical arrangement." "What arrangement?" "That depends on how useful you are." His hand came up toward her face. Clara stepped back once. Her heel found the edge of a warped floorboard. Beneath it, the limestone shelf carried a low, broad vibration that made her teeth ache. Water, deep, distant, moving under pressure. The sensation came suddenly clear, stronger than she had ever felt it in this part of the territory. Then the doorway darkened. A man stood on the porch with the late sun behind him. He wore buckskin darkened by travel and carried a rifle across his back. The room went silent in a way it had not for Vance. The sheriff's hand dropped toward his revolver. Jedediah straightened. Clara knew the face only from drawings in newspapers and from frightened stories told by settlers who had never met him. Cochise stepped inside. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. There was no theatrical menace in him, only a controlled stillness that made every nervous movement around him look foolish. Dust covered his moccasins. A narrow scar crossed one cheek. His eyes moved across the room over Vance, Elias, the card table, and stopped on Clara. For several breaths he simply looked at her, not at her dress. Not at the pale mark where her wedding ring had rubbed her finger. Not at Elias for permission, at her. "I have been looking for the girl who drew a road through stone," he said. Clara forgot Vance's hand. She forgot Elias. The words reached backward 15 years. Cochise reached into a leather pouch and removed a folded scrap wrapped in oiled hide. He opened it carefully. The paper inside had yellowed and split along the creases. Charcoal lines crossed it in a child's uncertain hand, 2 ridges, a wash, a narrow pass marked by 3 black dots, and a small circle where water could be found. Clara moved closer before she realized she had stepped. She knew every mark. She had drawn it at 13 in her father's surveyor camp after finding a wounded Chiricahua boy hiding beyond the cook tent. The campmen had wanted to chase him away. Her father had been gone with a crew. Clara had brought the boy water, bread, and a crude map, showing a narrow pass that avoided the soldiers' patrol road. She had never learned whether he survived. Cochise held the paper between them. "You kept it," she whispered. I needed to remember that not every hand holding a pencil meant to take land. Something moved behind his eyes. Not softness exactly. Memory. You were that boy. He nodded once. Elias stood so fast his chair scraped backward. Now hold on. She's my wife. Cochise looked at him for the first time. The effect was almost physical. Elias's next words died. Vance recovered sooner. This is a legal matter. Whatever story you two share, Sterling has a debt. Cochise reached into another pouch and poured several pieces of raw turquoise onto the card table. The stones landed with dull, heavy knocks. Even Jedediah's breath caught. The largest piece was threaded with dark copper and nearly the size of a hen's egg. Vance's eyes narrowed. Enough? Cochise asked. Vance did not answer immediately. His greed was obvious, but so was his calculation. He looked at the turquoise, at Cochise's rifle, and toward the bright windows where any companions might be waiting unseen. At market, Jedediah said quietly, that clears Sterling twice over. Vance shot him a look. Cochise kept his gaze on the sheriff. Then the debt is finished. Elias stepped toward the table. You can't just. Clara turned on him. Be quiet. He stopped. She had never used that tone with him. More startling than the words was the fact that she did not care what followed them. Vance swept the turquoise into his vest pocket. Debt settled. Clara looked at Cochise. And what do you expect in return? His answer came without hesitation. Nothing you do not choose. Then why pay? Because men who speak of choice while holding a chain are still holding a chain. He folded the old map and offered it to her. My people need the knowledge you once gave me. The springs in the high country are dying. Some were blocked. Others were diverted. Children are carrying stones in their mouths because they have no water to spare for spit. I came because I remembered a girl who knew where the ground breathed. Clara took the map. The paper trembled in her hand. She wanted to believe him. She also knew desperation could make noble language convenient. If I go with you, I go as myself. Yes, I leave when I choose. Yes. You do not trade me again. A flicker crossed his face, anger, but not at her. No one will trade you. Elias made a strangled sound. Clara, think what you're doing. She looked at the floor. Her own wedding ring lay near the leg of his chair where it had fallen earlier when Vance demanded proof of the marriage bargain. The thin band was dull with dust. For years she had thought a ring meant endurance. Her mother had taught her that marriage was a house built one repaired board at a time. But a house could not be repaired if one person kept selling the lumber. Clara stepped over the ring. Outside, the heat struck her face. She walked to the hitch rail. Cochise untied a buckskin mare and handed her the reins rather than the stirrup. The difference was small and enormous. Behind them, Elias called her name. Clara did not turn. They rode north until Ocotillo Wells flattened behind them into a low brown line. The mare had a sure gait and a white scar along her shoulder. Clara spent the first hour learning the animal's rhythm and the next hour listening to the road. The valley floor gave back broad, soft tremors. Granite outcrops sent sharper signals through the horse's legs. As the land rose, the air lost the smell of town refuse and took on juniper, dry pine, and sun-baked stone. Cochise did not crowd her with questions. He rode ahead on narrow trails, and beside her where the ground widened. At the first steep grade, he slowed his horse without commenting on her difficulty. When she nearly lost a stirrup on loose shale, he waited until she corrected herself before continuing. Near sunset, they stopped beside a shelf of layered limestone. Clara slid from the saddle and nearly fell when her legs refused to hold her. Cochise reached out, then stopped his hand short. Leaving the choice to her, she took his forearm and steadied herself. He released her as soon as she was balanced. No pity, no claim. Clara walked toward the rock face. A crack ran through it at knee height. The evening wind entered the crack but did not whistle back out. She crouched and placed her palm against the ground. The mountain answered in several layers. The solid limestone carried the fading hoofbeats of their horses. Loose talus absorbed them. Beneath both was a hollow resonance, a pocket where water had once passed. Cochise watched her draw a line in the dust with a stick. This channel is dry, she said, but not naturally. It once carried enough water to leave a cavity under this shelf. Something changed the direction uphill. How can you know? She glanced at him, braced for skepticism. He was not challenging her. He was asking to learn. Clara tapped the stone. Solid rock returns vibration quickly. A hollow delays it. Water changes the delay again. If you learn the differences, the ground tells you what is under it. Cochise knelt and put his palm where hers had been. He waited. I feel nothing, not nothing. You feel too much at once. A small smile appeared at one corner of his mouth. That sounds like a problem I have had with councils. The unexpected humor loosened something in her chest. She moved his hand 2 inches closer to the crack. Wait for the horse to shift. The buckskin stamped. Cochise's brow tightened. There, Clara said. He looked at her, a second touch after the first. Yes, he studied the crack again, a hidden space. Yes. For the first time since leaving the trading post, Clara smiled. They camped that night under a basalt overhang. Cochise built a small fire, not the large blaze Elias always insisted upon. He boiled water in a blackened pot, added dried herbs and a little coffee, and split a strip of venison with his knife. Clara ate slowly, her body only then remembering its hunger. The old map lay between them on a folded cloth. Why now? She asked. If you knew where I came from, why did you wait 15 years? I did not know your name. You could have found the survey camp. I returned 2 seasons later. It was gone. He turned the map over. On the back were faint stains, perhaps rains, perhaps sweat. I carried this through places where paper was less useful than food. Later I asked traders if they knew a surveyor's daughter who marked springs without rods. Some laughed. One called you the woman who listened to walls. Another said Elias Sterling had married a strange girl who could smell water in stone. That was the first time I had a name. And then soldiers closed the passes. Then my people moved. Then there were winters when searching for one person was a luxury. His voice remained even, but Clara heard the years inside the answer. Why did you keep looking? Cochise picked up the old paper. Because this was the only map I owned that asked for nothing. The fire snapped. He told her about the drought. The first year had been hard but familiar. The high country had always known dry seasons. The second year had been stranger. Springs that should have survived went still. Runoff disappeared from creeks within days of snowmelt. Scouts found fresh cart tracks near remote channels and stonework where no stonework had been before. Then settlers from a land company began appearing with documents claiming water rights downstream. Silas Vance? Clara asked. He is their local hand. The company has lawyers in Tucson and investors who want a rail spur through the valley. They cannot remove us cheaply while the canyons still hold water. So they make the canyons empty. Clara stared into the fire. A drought could be blamed on God. A stolen river required men. She thought of the deep vibration beneath the trading post. There is a large flow under the lower valley. I felt it when Vance approached me. If your upper springs were blocked, the pressure may have been forced into deeper fractures. Cochise leaned forward. Can it be returned? I don't know. He accepted the uncertainty more easily than Elias had ever accepted her certainty. Then we find out. The next morning they climbed before sunrise. Frost silvered the shaded stones even though the lower valley had been hot enough to blister skin. Clara wrapped her shawl over her shoulders and followed Cochise through a narrow pass where red sandstone walls rose on both sides. By mid-morning they reached a dry creek bed. Cottonwoods stood along it with half their leaves gone. A dead calf lay in a patch of shade, ribs visible beneath hide. Clara dismounted and walked the channel. She listened first with her feet, then with her hands. A large boulder near the center carried a peculiar distance. She moved upstream. The sensation strengthened. Water, she said. Cochise scanned the dry stones. Where? Not here, behind something. She climbed over a bank where the creek curved around a shoulder of rock. From below, the slope looked natural. From above, Clara saw 3 flat stones stacked in a pattern too regular for a flood deposit. She pulled away dead brush and found mortar. The same gray compound used in town foundations. Cochise scraped it with his knife. His face became still. This is one barrier, Clara said. Maybe not the main one. They chose a fractured section and reinforced it, then redirected the overflow into cracks. He looked down the dry creek toward the dead cottonwoods. How many men to build this? Enough to bring cement and tools by mule. Enough to know nobody would come here while the patrol roads were watched. A distant metallic clatter reached them. Cochise's head turned. Clara felt it a heartbeat later through the rock. Several horses moving fast, iron shoes striking stone. Vance, his deputies, if not him. They mounted quickly. The canyon offered little cover. Cochise guided them toward a narrower route, but Clara shook her head. Hoofbeats would echo there. Wait. She closed her eyes. Sound moved through the canyon in patterns she could almost see. The western wall curved inward, reflecting noise. The eastern wall was broken by seams of soft sandstone and pockets of vegetation that swallowed it. Follow me. She led the mare across the wash. then along the eastern base where the ground alternated between sand and flat rock. At intervals, she slowed until a gust of wind rushed through the canyon, using it to cover the horse's steps. Cochise did not question the strange zigzag course. The deputy's shouts grew louder, then uncertain. One rider passed the mouth of the side channel without seeing them. Another called from farther south, convinced the fugitives had doubled back. Clara's pulse raced, but not from helpless fear. For the first time, danger sharpened her gift instead of drowning it. They moved into deep shade beneath a limestone overhang. There the air changed. A cool draft touched the sweat at Clara's neck. She stopped. Cochise scanned the ridge. What? Air. There is no wind here. That is why. She dismounted and approached a wall draped in dead grapevine. The stone looked solid, but her footsteps returned with a faint hollow delay. She pulled at the vines, dust fell. Behind them ran a vertical fissure wide enough for a person to turn sideways and enter. Cochise touched the crack. This passage is not on any trail, I know. Clara leaned near it. Deep inside, a drop of water struck stone, then another. Farther still was a continuous vibration, low and enormous. The river, she said. They squeezed through the fissure with the horses one at a time. The passage opened into a hidden basin ringed by high rock. Beyond it, another narrow route descended toward a cluster of brush shelters tucked beneath cottonwoods. The first thing Clara noticed was how quiet the camp was. Not peaceful quiet, exhaustion. Women sat beneath shade scraping moisture from prickly pear pulp. An old man carried 2 clay jars from a seep that produced water 1 slow cup at a time. Children watched the horses arrive but did not run toward them. A little girl held a smooth stone in her mouth, sucking at its cool surface. Cochise dismounted and crossed the camp. People came toward him, relief mixed with questions. Then they noticed Clara. Suspicion moved faster than greeting. An elder with gray hair braided down his back studied her from beneath a dying cottonwood. "You brought a white woman while our children drink cactus?" he asked. Cochise placed the old map on a flat stone. "I brought the one who drew this." The elder's gaze shifted to the paper. Several others came closer. Cochise told the story without embellishment. A boy, a survey camp, a cup of water, a path through patrol lines. He said Clara had already found proof that the creeks were blocked by men. He did not call her a savior. He did not ask anyone to trust her because he did. He gave them facts. The elder looked at Clara. "Can you find enough water to keep these children alive?" Clara looked around the camp. Every face seemed to hold the same question. "I can find where it is," she said. "I cannot promise I can bring it here until I know how it is trapped." A younger man frowned. "That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have." The elder's expression changed slightly. Clara knelt and put both palms on the earth. The camp's noise fell away by degrees, feet shifting, leather creaking, a child coughing. Beneath all of it, deep under limestone and granite, ran a broad pulse. It was stronger than anything she had felt before, but the flow did not move cleanly. Somewhere uphill it struck an obstruction and drove pressure sideways into the mountain. She opened her eyes. "The water is above us and under us," she said. "A large body is trapped near a cave in that ridge." She pointed north. The elder followed her hand. "Sacred cave. Then someone has done something inside it." A murmur passed through the group. The younger man stepped closer. "No outsider enters there." Cochise said nothing. Clara stood. "Then I do not enter. But if the blockage is where I think it is, the pressure will keep rising. It may break another way. If that happens, you could lose the water into deeper fractures or bring half the ridge down." The elder studied her for a long time. Finally he said, "At first light we listened to the mountain. Clara slept poorly. The camp gave her a place in a brush shelter beside 2 widowed women and their children. One woman handed her a folded blanket without speaking. The little girl with the river stone set a half cup of water beside Clara's bedroll. Clara tried to refuse it. The woman shook her head. She chose. Clara drank only 1 swallow and returned the cup to the child. Outside, the stars looked close enough to catch in the branches. She could hear low voices from the council fire, and under them, the constant buried rhythm of water. She thought of Elias. For years she had shaped herself around his shame. When he failed to find ore, she stopped mentioning the veins she sensed. When he accused her of embarrassing him, she stopped drawing maps in front of visitors. When he told neighbors her spells came from nerves, she agreed to tonics that dulled her senses and left her sick. She had believed peace could be purchased by shrinking. Here, strangers who had every reason to distrust her had asked only whether she could do what she claimed. The simplicity of that frightened her almost as much as the danger. At dawn, she found Cochise beside the dying cottonwood. He handed her roasted yucca and a cup of bitter tea. "You did not sleep," he said. "Neither did you. I sleep enough. That is what tired men say." This time his smile was easier. They climbed with the elder and 4 others. Clara carried chalk, a hammer, cord, and a small piece of charcoal. At intervals, she stopped to mark rock or place her ear against the ground. The closer they came to the sacred cave, the stronger the pressure became. The entrance lay behind a fold in the ridge. Cool air spilled from it. The elder stopped outside and touched the rock with both hands before nodding to Clara. Permission. Inside, daylight vanished within 20 steps. Torches threw wavering light over walls slick with mineral deposits. The cave smelled of wet iron, bat droppings, and old stone. Clara's fear came back unexpectedly. Elias used to lock her in their root cellar when she had episodes, as he called them. He said darkness would quiet her imagination. In truth, darkness made the vibrations louder. She would sit between jars of beans and sacks of flour, feeling every wagon on the distant road through the packed ground, until she thought she would split apart. Her breathing shortened. Cochise noticed. "We can stop." "No, you do not have to prove anything." "I know." She touched the wall. "That is why I can keep going." The deeper chamber opened suddenly, high-ceilinged and black beyond the torchlight. Water thundered somewhere behind a constructed wall of stone. Clara approached it. At first it appeared natural. Then she saw the mortar lines. She scraped one with the hammer. Gray powder fell. Men built this. The elder whispered something in his own language. Grief and anger mixed in the sound. Clara moved along the wall, touching each seam. Most sections carried the river's pressure as a broad, dangerous vibration. Near the eastern edge, one narrow wedge of darker stone sang at a higher pitch. She put her palm on it and nearly jerked away. "This is the key." Cochise came beside her. "Can it be removed?" "Yes, but not by striking it first." She drew the wall in charcoal on a flat section of limestone, marking braces and stress lines. They used the natural fault to their advantage. The wall is holding because the pressure pushes this stone against these supports. If we break the wrong piece, the ceiling could come down. We have to remove weight from the east, then open a narrow channel so the first water relieves pressure before the larger seal gives way. The elder listened while Cochise translated the technical parts she could not simplify. "How long?" he asked. "If we have enough hands and iron tools, a day, maybe 2. A faint vibration ran through the floor. Clara froze. Not water. Horses. Many. Cochise felt her reaction. "How far?" "On the lower trail." "Less than an hour." One of the scouts ran toward the cave mouth. Moments later he returned. "Vance. 8 men. Sterling is with them." The elder's hand closed around his knife. Cochise lifted his rifle. Clara looked from the constructed wall to the tunnel behind them. A gunfight at the cave entrance could shatter rock, kill men, and leave the river trapped forever. "No," she said. Cochise turned. "If you fight them at the mouth, bullets will strike the fault zone. The whole chamber is under pressure. They will enter if we do not stop them. Then let them enter." The scout stared at her. Clara raised the torch and looked into the dark passages branching away from the main chamber. The cave had already drawn itself inside her mind. 3 corridors, a narrow crawl, a tall chamber with a curved wall, several pockets where sound returned from the wrong direction. She looked at Cochise. "In here, they will not know what is in front of them." A distant voice carried from outside, magnified by stone. "Clara, Elias." Her body reacted before her mind did. Her shoulders tightened. The old instinct told her to hide, apologize, become small enough to survive his anger. Then she felt the river against her palm. A mountain of water waited behind a wall built by greedy men. A camp of children waited below with dry mouths. Elias's voice was suddenly only noise. Vance shouted next, "Come out and no one gets hurt." "That water belongs to the syndicate by recorded deed." Clara laughed once, softly, without humor. Cochise glanced at her. "What? He thinks paper matters in a cave." She pointed to the first side passage. "Take everyone except us through there. No torches after the second bend. I need 3 people farther ahead to move stones when I signal. We can make them follow sound away from the river chamber. And you?" "I know where the floor is safe." Cochise studied her. "Then I stay." She did not argue. The others disappeared into darkness. Clara and Cochise retreated to a junction where the ceiling narrowed. They extinguished their torch. Blackness arrived completely. Vance's men entered with lanterns. Their light appeared around the far bend as a trembling orange smear. "Mrs. Sterling," Vance called. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Clara pressed one hand to the wall. His boots sent bright, clumsy signals through the rock. Elias's steps were easier to identify, shorter, hesitant, dragging slightly on the right since an old ankle injury. Cochise's breath warmed the air beside her. She whispered, "Now." A stone dropped in a passage to their left. The sound struck a curved wall and returned from behind Vance's men. Several spun around. What was that? Another stone clicked from deeper inside. This time the echo came from above. Vance cursed. "Stay together." Clara moved through the narrow corridor without light. She counted steps and changes in floor slope. Behind her, Cochise followed by touching the wall where she touched it. At the next chamber, Clara picked up a pebble and tossed it into a hollow on the opposite side. The tiny impact became a sharp series of cracks. A deputy fired. The gunshot exploded through the cave. Men shouted and ducked. Someone dropped a lantern. Clara felt the vibration race through the stone and held her breath until it faded. The river wall remained intact. Vance screamed at the shooter. "No more firing unless you see a body," Elias's voice broke through. "Clara, please, just come out. We can fix this." The words bounced down 2 corridors and returned altered. "Fix this, fix this, fix." Clara closed her eyes, though there was nothing to see. For years she had waited to hear him say those words. Now they sounded ridiculous. She and Cochise slipped through a fissure into a higher tunnel. Air moved there. Clara pulled one loose hair across her fingers and felt the faint draft tug it upward. "This leads out," she whispered. Behind them, Vance's group pushed deeper into the wrong passage. A man cursed as he stepped into ankle-deep mud. Another insisted he heard footsteps behind them. Elias began breathing loudly enough that even without the cave's tricks, Clara could hear his panic. They reached a narrow chimney where pale daylight shone far above. Cochise looked up. "Can you climb?" "I can if the alternative is listening to Elias apologize for another hour." He almost laughed. The climb bruised Clara's knees and tore one sleeve. At the top, Cochise pushed aside brush and helped her onto a granite ledge overlooking the canyon. The sky opened around them, immense and blue. Clara lay on her back for several breaths, tasting cold air. Then she sat up. Below, Vance's horses waited at the cave entrance. Farther down the valley, the hidden camp lay out of sight. The mountain's internal vibration continued beneath her, steady and urgent. Cochise stood at the edge. "They will find their way out eventually." "Yes, then we return before they do." Clara looked at the slope leading toward camp. Not by the main trail, he turned to her. She pointed across a line of dark stone. "There is a ridge path, solid granite, no hollow sections. It will carry us faster." Cochise offered his hand. This time Clara did not hesitate before taking it. They reached the camp before sunset. Word of the cave spread quickly, but Clara did not stop to retell the danger. She went straight to the flat limestone slab near the council fire and began building a model of the blocked chamber using stones, clay, and pieces of wood. People gathered while she worked. "This is the river," she said, pressing a rounded stone into the center. "This wall is not simply holding it back. It is using the mountain's pressure against itself." She wedged a sharp piece of quartz between 2 stones. "If we remove this first, we die." Nobody moved. She pulled a smaller support from the side. "If we relieve the eastern brace, then make a narrow cut here, the water begins to escape. Pressure drops. Then we remove the keystone." The elder asked, "And Vance?" Clara looked toward the ridge. "Vance will come again. Men who believe land is a ledger do not accept the answer no." Cochise stood behind the circle. "Then we finish the river before he returns." The elder looked at Clara. "Tell us where to place our hands." Work began before dawn. Men carried iron bars and hammers into the cave. Women brought rope, lamps, food, and water measured carefully from the remaining seep. Clara stayed at the wall, marking stones with charcoal and correcting every strike. She would put her hand against the rock after each change, waiting until the vibration settled before allowing the next. The labor was slow. Dust coated mouths and lashes. Arms shook. Twice Clara ordered everyone back when the ceiling groaned. Once a brace shifted half an inch and sent a crack racing across mortar like lightning. Cochise watched her face. "Too much?" "Not yet. Say when." She nodded. By afternoon they had exposed the eastern support. A narrow gap breathed cold air against Clara's wrist. "Here," she said. They drove a thin iron wedge into the mortar seam. The first water appeared not as a stream but as a silver thread. A child's width of clear water ran over Clara's fingers. Everyone in the chamber stopped. Cochise touched it. The elder touched it after him. Clara put her palm against the wall. The river's pressure changed. Again, she said. They widened the gap. The thread became a hard jet that struck the floor and cut a channel through old silt. The mountain gave a deep, settling sound. Clara's heart jumped. Back. People scrambled toward higher ground. For one suspended second, nothing happened. Then the keystone moved. A crack snapped through the chamber. The wall bowed. Cochise caught Clara around the waist as the floor shuddered beneath them. The entire seal broke inward. Water burst from the mountain with a force that erased the remaining mortar in seconds. It filled the lower chamber, white with air and pulverized stone, then surged toward the cave mouth in a roaring sheet. Clara and Cochise climbed onto a shelf above the flood. Mist soaked her hair and dress. The air filled with the smell of cold minerals and wet earth. The sound was beyond hearing. It entered her bones. She laughed. She could not help it. The laugh tore out of her with tears she had refused at the trading post, tears she had refused on the trail, tears she had swallowed through every insult Elias called concern. Below them, the deep river reclaimed its path. Cochise looked at her with water running down his face. "You heard it." Clara shook her head, breathless. It was shouting. He laughed then too, a short sound of disbelief and release. Outside, the torrent poured into the dry creek bed. The camp heard it before they saw it. People ran toward the channel as the first surge darkened the dust. Children shouted. Women dropped empty jars and lifted their hands into the spray. The old cottonwood's roots disappeared under moving water. Clara walked out of the cave on shaking legs. The little girl who had given her half a cup the night before stood ankle-deep in the stream, crying and laughing at once. She filled a clay cup and carried it to Clara. Clara drank. The water tasted of iron, limestone, and deep cold. A memory struck her. A tin cup in a survey camp, a thirsty boy, a map drawn in charcoal. Cochise stood beside her. 15 years had folded into a circle. Then a scout on the ridge shouted. Everyone looked south. Dust rose in a long line beyond the canyon mouth. Vance had found his way out of the cave, and this time he was bringing more men. The celebration lasted less than 10 minutes. Cochise was the first to move. He lifted one hand, and the people nearest him fell quiet. The children were guided from the new stream. Clay jars were carried uphill. Men who had spent the morning hauling iron bars from the cave picked up rifles instead. Clara remained at the edge of the water, listening. The new river complicated everything. Its roar filled the canyon and masked distant sound. Before, she could have counted approaching horses from half a mile away. Now each hoofbeat was mixed with the constant percussion of water striking stone. She knelt and put her fingertips against a dry ledge above the stream. The granite carried what air did not, many horses. More than 10, perhaps 15. She looked toward the narrow entrance to the basin. They are coming fast. Cochise joined her. We can close the pass, with rifles if necessary. Clara thought of the cave, the unstable fault, and the men firing blindly in darkness. Then she looked up at the canyon walls. The basin had its own geometry, concave faces, narrow throats, ledges that threw sound from one side to another. The deep river now added a constant bass note. We can make them think they are surrounded. Cochise waited. Clara pointed to a curved limestone wall above the lower trail. A drum there will sound from everywhere below. Put another across from it, but higher, not together. 3 beats, then silence. Then 5 from the other side. He followed her finger. Scouts? Move them where their shadows can be seen, but not their bodies. Let Vance catch glimpses. Never enough to count. The elder approached, water still dripping from his hands. You mean to frighten armed men with sound? I mean to let their own fear count our numbers for us. The elder's eyes narrowed, then shifted toward the cave. He had seen what confusion did to Vance's men in darkness. Cochise said, "Do it." The basin changed from celebration to preparation without wasted motion. 2 drums were carried to separate shelves. Boys brought fist-sized stones to hidden scouts. Women led horses into a side ravine where they could not be seen from below. Fires were extinguished. The new river continued to shine through the canyon like a strip of moving metal. Clara climbed to a narrow platform above the entrance. From there she could see the lower trail winding through the rocks. Cochise came beside her. You should be farther back. Why? Vance came for you. He came for water. I am only the person standing between him and it. That makes you the first target. Clara looked at him. Then I need to see him. A long moment passed. Cochise nodded. The first riders appeared as dark shapes in the amber light. Sheriff Vance led them, hat pulled low, jaw bandaged where he must have struck stone in the cave. Behind him rode deputies, hired guards, and men Clara recognized from Ocotillo Wells. Elias came near the rear on a gray mule that clearly belonged to someone else. He looked smaller than she remembered. Vance stopped when he saw the river crossing the lower wash. Even from the ridge, Clara could read his anger. He stared at the water as a merchant might stare at a warehouse in flames. One of his men dismounted and touched the stream. Another filled his hat and drank. Vance struck the hat from his hands. "Mount up." His voice carried poorly against the river. Clara felt the horses begin moving again. She raised one hand. The first drum sounded, 3 slow beats. The curved wall gathered each strike and threw it down the canyon. The riders stopped. Several horses sidestepped. Silence. 5 beats answered from the opposite ridge. A deputy looked over his shoulder. Vance shouted something Clara could not hear. A scout released a stone from a ledge. It struck below, rolled, and multiplied through echoes until it sounded like a line of men moving behind the posse. 2 riders turned around. Vance forced them forward. Clara signaled again. This time, both drums sounded in different patterns. The new river caught the low frequencies and seemed to carry them underfoot. Horses tossed their heads. Men scanned the cliffs. Cochise said quietly, "They cannot see an enemy. They brought one with them." He looked at her. Their imagination. The first gunshot came from a nervous rider near the rear. He fired at a shadow-crossing high stone. The report slammed between the walls and returned 4 times. 3 other men fired in response, believing shots were coming from above. Vance wheeled his horse and shouted at them. His own voice rebounded from a pocket behind him. The line lost formation. Elias pulled his mule toward the side as if preparing to flee. Vance grabbed his bridle. Clara could not hear their words, but she understood the exchange. Elias wanted out. Vance would not let him go because Elias was still useful as a claim against her. The sheriff pushed him to the front. "Clara!" Elias shouted. The name reached her in fragments. "Clara, stop this! Tell them to stop!" She remained still. Vance added his voice. "Mrs. Sterling, I have a warrant for theft of syndicate water, theft of livestock, assault on sworn deputies, and conspiracy." The list would have been funny if men with rifles were not beneath it. Clara stepped onto the edge of the ridge where he could see her. Cochise moved with her but stayed half a pace back. Vance pointed upward. "There she is." Several rifles lifted. Cochise raised his own. Clara touched his forearm. "Wait." She cupped her hands and spoke toward the curved wall beside her rather than directly at the posse. "Sheriff Vance." The canyon carried her voice down with surprising clarity. The rifles wavered. "You built a dam inside the sacred cave using industrial mortar. You diverted water from the upper creeks and sold downstream rights to your own investors." Vance shouted back, "You know nothing about rights. I know your mortar." A few of the hired men looked at one another. Clara continued, "I know where the pack mule trail enters the north ridge. I know where your crews stacked cement sacks behind the false wall. I know how long the barrier stood because the mineral stains show the old water line. You can call it a deed if you like. Stone does not know the word." Vance drew his revolver and fired at the ridge. The bullet struck far below Clara and sparked against rock. Cochise fired once. His shot hit the ground in front of Vance's horse. The animal reared. Vance nearly fell. No one else on the ridge fired. That restraint unsettled the posse more than a volley would have. Clara raised her hand again. The drums began a faster rhythm. Scouts moved along high ledges, showing a shoulder, a rifle barrel, the edge of a blanket, then vanishing. Each glimpse appeared on a different side. Stones rolled from behind the posse. A whistle from the east returned from the west. The hired guns began arguing. One insisted there were 50 men above them. Another claimed 100. A deputy swore he saw riders behind the ridge, even though no horses were there. Vance tried to push forward into the basin. His horse refused. The animal could feel what the men could not, a narrow strip of mud where the river had softened the old trail. The next horse stepped into it and sank to the fetlock. Its rider cursed, dismounted, and was immediately struck in the shoulder by his own mount, turning in panic. The line collapsed into confusion. Elias slid from his mule. He did not fall. He simply got off and raised both hands. "Clara!" His voice came up thinly. "I'm not with him." "You know I'm not." Clara stared down. Vance turned on him. "Get back on that mule." Elias shook his head. "Sterling, no." For perhaps the first time in his life, Elias's cowardice placed him on the correct side of a decision. He backed away from the sheriff. Vance struck him across the face with the barrel of his revolver. Elias dropped to one knee. Clara's stomach tightened, not from affection but from memory. She knew the posture, head lowered, one hand on the ground, waiting to see if another blow would come. Elias looked up at her. Please, Cochise's jaw hardened. Clara said, Stop the drums. The sound ended. The sudden quiet was enormous. Only the river remained. Vance looked around, confused by the change. Clara descended the ridge path. Cochise followed. Halfway down, the elder and several armed men appeared on separate ledges. They did not aim rifles directly, but the message was clear. Clara reached the riverbank 20 yards from Vance. He kept his revolver in hand. You think this makes you important? He said. A trick with echoes and a lucky break in the rock? Clara's wet hem clung to her boots. She could smell horse sweat, fired powder, and fresh water. No, she said. I think the water makes your scheme useless. Vance's face darkened. You don't understand how this territory works. I understand exactly how you wanted it to work. Dry the upper valley. Buy abandoned claims cheap. Sell the water downstream. Bring the railroad through land nobody can live on until your company says otherwise. One of the hired men shifted. Vance noticed. Shut your mouth, woman. Clara almost smiled. The command belonged to another life. No, he raised the revolver. Cochise moved, but Elias moved first. Still on one knee, Elias lunged and struck Vance's wrist with both hands. The gun fired into the river. Cochise crossed the distance in seconds. He twisted the revolver away and drove Vance face first into the wet stones. The hired men lifted their rifles. From the ridges, Chiricahua rifles appeared in answer. Nobody fired. The balance held for one breath, then two. A deputy slowly placed his Winchester on the ground. Another did the same. The rest followed. Vance cursed into the mud. Cochise pulled him upright and shoved him toward the water. The sheriff's cheek bled. His badge hung crooked. Cochise pointed to the stream. Drink. Vance spat blood. Go to hell. Cochise did not change expression. You came for water. Drink. Vance looked at the armed ridges, at his men's weapons on the ground, and finally at Clara. She felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. He knelt. One by one, the men who had come to seize the river crouched at its bank. They drank because they were thirsty, because they were defeated, and because the people they had intended to starve allowed them to drink. Clara watched Vance cup water in both hands. It ran through his fingers before he could bring enough to his mouth. Cold, isn't it? She asked. He glared at her. That water was behind your wall while children sucked cactus pulp. He looked away. Cochise ordered the rifles stacked. Ammunition belts followed. The men were allowed to keep horses in canteens. They were told to leave the upper valley before dark. Vance started toward his horse. The elder spoke. Cochise translated. Your badge stays. Vance stopped. You have no authority to. The elder stepped forward. Vance removed the badge. He threw it onto the stones. The little piece of silver landed near the river, bright against black rock. Clara looked at it and thought of another circle of silver lying on a trading post floor. Neither had the power its owner imagined. Elias remained behind when the others mounted. Vance noticed. Sterling. Elias did not answer. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You come with me, or you can explain your debts to the syndicate yourself. Elias looked at Clara, then at the empty mule. I'll walk. Vance laughed cruelly. You always were a fool. He rode away. The others followed, leaving wet hoofprints along the lower trail. Clara stood across from her husband. Without Vance, cards, whiskey, or a room full of spectators, Elias looked ordinary. The cut on his cheek had begun to swell. Dust clung to his hair. His shirt sleeve was torn at the elbow. He opened his mouth. Clara said, Do not apologize yet. He closed it. First tell me why you came back. Elias looked toward the retreating riders. Vance said you'd found the water. He said if we took it, there'd be money. More money than we'd ever seen. There it was. Clara nodded. Thank you. His face crumpled. I knew that would sound bad. It sounds true. I didn't know he meant to kill anyone. You knew he meant to starve them. No. Clara, I didn't know half of what he was doing. You knew enough. He rubbed his face. I was afraid. You were always afraid. He looked at her sharply. She continued, not cruelly. That is not the worst thing about you, Elias. Fear is ordinary. The worst thing is that every time you were afraid, you looked for someone else to pay. He began to cry. Clara had imagined this moment during sleepless years. Ilias broken. Elias sorry. Elias understanding the harm he had done. In those fantasies, she was vindicated by his pain. The reality felt different. His tears did not give her back anything. I loved you, he said. Sometimes. I still do. You want what I can do? No. He stepped closer. No, I want us. We could start again. With the river, with your maps, God, Clara, you could make us rich. We could buy land, a real house, servants. I'd never gamble again. She stared at him. Even now. Even on his knees before a river he had not believed existed, he could only imagine her gift translated into his wealth. "You are still bargaining," she said. His mouth opened. "You traded me when you were losing. Now you want me because you think I'm valuable again. That is not love. It is bookkeeping. I can change. Maybe you can." Hope flashed in his eyes. "But you will not change with me." The hope vanished. She stepped closer until they were separated by less than an arm's length. "I spent years listening for the version of you that you kept promising would arrive after the next strike, the next debt, the next good hand. He never came. I am done waiting for him." Elias looked past her toward Cochise. "So that's it? You choose him?" Clara followed his gaze. Cochise stood several yards away, giving them space. He did not look possessive. He did not look triumphant. He was speaking with the elder while helping a young man lift the recovered rifles. Clara turned back. "I choose myself." Elias laughed once, bitterly. "And that just happens to mean staying with him. It means staying where my work matters and where my choices are mine." He looked down at the river. "What am I supposed to do?" Clara felt the old reflex: solve his problem, give him a path, make his uncertainty manageable. She let the silence stand. "That is the first thing you have to decide without using me." Elias's shoulders sank. The elder allowed him a horse only after Cochise said the lower desert was too far to walk before nightfall. Elias took the reins with both hands. Before mounting, he turned to Clara. "Did you ever love me?" She considered lying to make departure easier. "Yes," she said. "That is why this hurt." He nodded as though struck. Clara continued, "But what I loved cannot be the price of what you did." Elias climbed onto the horse. He rode after Vance without another word. The valley breathed again after the riders disappeared. People collected the abandoned weapons and ammunition. Scouts were posted along the high approaches. Children returned to the river, with the impatience of children everywhere. Danger already losing its hold on them. Clara sat on a flat stone and realized her legs were shaking. Cochise brought her a gourd of water. She drank, then pressed the cool vessel to her forehead. "You gave him a horse," she said. "Yes. He betrayed you too. He is no threat without someone stronger to hide behind. You sound very sure." "I am sure of the mountain. Men are less predictable." Clara looked toward the lower trail. "He moved Vance's gun." "He did. That does not erase anything." "No." She appreciated the answer. Cochise sat beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Across the channel, the little girl filled a jar and carried it carefully toward an older woman. Her bare feet left dark prints on wet sand. Clara said, "When I was married, I used to imagine someone would come and tell Elias he was wrong about me." Cochise listened. "I thought that would fix something. A doctor, a surveyor, anyone respectable enough that he would have to believe them." She rubbed the pale ring mark on her finger. "Then you walked into the trading post and did exactly that, and it did not fix me. You were not broken." She glanced at him. "Do not make me into a legend yet." His mouth curved. "Then what fixed you?" "Nothing." She looked at the water. "I think I simply stopped asking the wrong person to tell me what was true." Cochise nodded slowly. That evening, the river became part of camp life with astonishing speed. Clay jars lined the bank. Meat simmered in pots with enough water to soften roots. Children were washed despite protesting the cold. Someone rinsed blankets that had not seen more than a damp cloth in months. Mud appeared everywhere. Clara helped rebuild a small channel toward the old seep. She showed two men how to line it with flat stones so the new flow would not erode the bank too quickly. An older woman handed her a bone needle and directed her, with gestures more than words, to repair the tear in her sleeve. The domesticity of the night affected Clara more than the victory had. She sat beside a cooking fire sewing buckskin while stew bubbled in a clay pot. The air smelled of cedar smoke, wet wool, roasted squash, and clean mud. People spoke around her in a language she only partly understood. No one watched her as a curiosity. When she needed more thread, a woman passed it without ceremony. For the first time since childhood, Clara experienced belonging as something ordinary. Later, Cochise came to the fire and sat across from her. He placed the old yellowed map between them. "Keep it," he said. Clara touched the edge but did not pick it up. "You carried it 15 years. It led me where it needed to. And now? Now you decide what it means." Clara looked at the childish lines. They were inaccurate by any professional standard. Distances were wrong. The north arrow leaned. The pass had been drawn too wide. Yet a boy had used it to live. Her father would have corrected it in red ink. Elias would have laughed. Cochise had carried it through war. Clara folded it carefully and put it in the pocket sewn inside her dress. Not because it is a good map, she said. No, because it reminds me that useful things do not have to be perfect. Cochise looked at her for a moment and then nodded. 3 days passed without sight of Vance. The river settled from a violent flood into a fast, clear stream. Clara spent each morning walking its course. She marked unstable banks, listened for shifts in underground pressure, and found 2 places where water could be directed into small storage pools without weakening the canyon walls. She also began to notice how much she did not know. A woman named Nolly showed her which plants held water late into summer. An older hunter taught her how to read weather in the movement of ravens. A boy of 10 showed her a safer way to cross a scree slope she had considered stable. Clara's gift did not make her master of the mountains. It made her one kind of listener among many. The discovery pleased her. Elias had either worshipped usefulness when it benefited him, or despised it when it made him feel small. Here, knowledge moved from person to person without needing a single owner. On the 4th morning, Jedediah Thorne rode into the canyon alone. Scouts stopped him far below and brought him on foot. His hat was missing. His beard had grown unevenly. He carried no weapon. Clara met him near the lower stream. He stared at the water for a long time. "I heard," he said. "So did half the valley by now. Vance says you attacked deputies and stole company property. What do you say?" Jedediah rubbed his mouth. "I say I sold those cement sacks." Clara became still. To whom? He looked ashamed. A freight contractor named Pike said they were reinforcing mine tunnels. Vance signed the order. I didn't ask where they were going. You knew the upper creeks were failing. Yes. You knew the syndicate was buying abandoned ranches. Yes. And you did not ask. No. The river filled the pause. Jedediah reached inside his coat and produced a ledger wrapped in cloth. I started asking after you left. Clara took it. The ledger contained freight entries, payments, dates, and names. Cement, iron rods, blasting powder, mule teams. Several deliveries had been billed to non-existent mining sites near the exact ridges where Clara found blockages. Vance's initials appeared beside them. "This can prove what they did," she said. "If anyone cares to prove it, why bring it here?" Jedediah looked at her. "Because I stood behind my counter and watched Elias put you on a table like a sack of flour." Clara's grip tightened on the ledger. "I told myself it wasn't my business. That was the phrase I used for everything. Vance collecting extra fees, men losing deeds in games, freight going where it shouldn't. None of my business." He looked toward the camp above. "Turns out a town can rot because too many men decide the same thing isn't their business." Clara did not forgive him, but she believed him. Cochise joined them. Jedediah explained the ledger again. "The syndicate will send someone else," he said. "Vance is finished as sheriff if the territorial judge sees this, but the company has money." Cochise asked, "What does the town need?" "Water." Clara looked at him. Jedediah hurried on. "Not ownership. I understand that. But the lower wells are failing too. Families who had nothing to do with Vance are hauling barrels 10 miles. Some of those families laughed when I was traded," Clara said. Jedediah swallowed. "Yes, and you want me to save them. I want you to tell me whether there's a way to share enough water without giving the company control." Clara looked at the stream. She could say no. Part of her wanted to. Not from justice, but from the simple human desire to let people feel the consequence of what they had ignored. Then she remembered a tin cup offered to a thirsty boy by a child who had not asked which side he belonged to. "Water does not have to become forgiveness," she said. Jedediah waited. "I will look at the lower fractures. If there is a route that does not endanger this valley, the town can receive a measured channel." Relief crossed his face. On conditions. He nodded quickly. No syndicate ownership. No deed claiming the source. No dams without agreement from the council. The freight road stays out of the sacred ridge. And every household that uses the channel contributes labor to maintain it. Jedediah stared at her. "You sound like a lawyer." "I sound like someone who learned what happens when other people write the contract." Cochise's expression showed approval. Jedediah left the ledger and rode back before dusk. The evidence changed the next phase of the struggle. It did not end danger, but it moved some of it away from rifles. A territorial agent came weeks later with 2 men and many questions. He climbed to the false wall, scraped the mortar, checked freight dates, and returned to town with Jedediah's ledger. Vance disappeared before he could be arrested. Rumors placed him in New Mexico, then Sonora, then drunk in a mining camp where nobody cared about his old badge. Clara did not care which rumor was true. Elias stayed in Ocotillo Wells. Jedediah said he worked for meals at the stable and had not touched cards since returning. Clara did not ask for more. The river required her attention. Weeks passed. One morning the elder found Clara kneeling with 3 children beside a flat drum. She had placed their palms on the ground. "Close your eyes," she told them. "Do not listen for the sound. Wait for the ground to bring it." She tapped the drum once. The smallest child opened his eyes immediately. "I felt it." "Where?" He pointed not toward the drum, but toward a granite slab behind him. Clara smiled. "Good." Granite carried it and returned it. She moved the drum onto sand and struck again. The vibration softened. "Different?" The children nodded. Clara showed them how limestone could hide a cavity, and how running water changed the character of an echo. She never told them they would hear what she heard. Perhaps none would. That was not the point. The point was to teach attention. The elder watched from a distance. When the lesson ended, he said, "You are making more listeners. I am making children put their ears in the dirt." That too. His humor was dry enough that Clara almost missed it. That night, Cochise found her on a ridge above camp. She was drawing a new map on cured hide, combining streams, escape routes, unstable slopes, and places where echoes carried dangerously far. He sat beside her. "You have been here a month," he said. Clara kept drawing. "Is that a complaint?" "No." "Then why count?" "Because on the first day you said you would leave when you chose." Her charcoal stopped. Cochise continued. "I want you to know the choice still exists." She looked at him. No one had reminded her of an open door before. People who wanted her to stay tended to hide exits. "Do you want me to go?" "No." The answer was simple and immediate. "Then why say this?" "Because wanting you here and keeping you here are not the same thing." Clara looked down at the map. The words settled more deeply than any declaration could have. She thought of the cabin with Elias, where every decision had narrowed over time. Which town they lived in, which visitors she could speak openly around, whether she could ride alone, whether her father's land could be sold, whether her own mind was trustworthy. Here Cochise wanted her presence enough to make sure it remained voluntary. "I am not leaving," she said. He did not smile triumphantly. He only asked, "Today?" Clara laughed. "Today. Tomorrow too, if that helps." "It does." A breeze moved through the pines, carrying the river's sound upward. Clara returned to the hide map. After a while, Cochise placed his hand beside hers, not touching. She turned her palm over. Their fingers met. Nothing in the mountains shifted. No drum sounded. No old promise was fulfilled by magic. It was only a hand held because both people wanted it there. For Clara, that was enough to feel extraordinary. The first cold night of the season came early. Clara woke before dawn because the ground had changed. Not danger, temperature. Granite contracted differently under sudden cold, producing small ticks and settling noises that traveled through the stone shelf beneath her sleeping mat. For a moment she lay still, wrapped in wool, listening to the mountain rearrange itself. Beside the shelter entrance, frost whitened a clay water jar. Clara dressed and stepped outside. The camp was quiet. Embers glowed under ash. Horses shifted in the dark. Far below, the river ran at a steady level through the channel they had widened by hand. She walked to the bank and knelt. During the first weeks after the release, she had feared the river would vanish as quickly as it appeared. Every morning she measured depth with a marked willow stick. Every evening she checked the pressure near the cave. The flow had decreased from its violent first surge, but it had stabilized. Underground chambers were refilling. The system had not been destroyed. Clara wrote the measurement in a small notebook Jedediah had brought from town. A voice behind her said, "Still there?" She turned. Nolly carried 2 empty jars and wore a blanket over her head against the cold. "Still there," Clara said. Nolly rolled her eyes. "You ask the river the same question every morning, and so far it gives the right answer. You do not trust water. I trust water. I do not trust men with shovels." Nolly laughed softly and handed Clara a jar. They filled both together. The friendship had formed without ceremony. Nolly was several years older, widowed, practical, and unimpressed by Clara's reputation. She had been the woman who gave Clara the first blanket in camp. Since then, she had corrected Clara's terrible attempts at tanning hide, laughed at the way she chopped wood, and taught her which roots could be boiled into a drink when coffee ran out. In return, Clara showed Nolly how to locate shallow cavities near dry washes. "You listen too hard," Nolly once told her. Clara had been offended until she realized the advice was useful. Some signals only became clear when she stopped forcing herself to find them. By sunrise, the camp was awake. Smoke rose from cook fires. Children carried water without ration guards standing over them. A boy chased a dog through mud and received a sharp rebuke from 3 different adults. The cottonwood near the council circle had begun to recover, small green shoots appearing at branches everyone assumed were dead. Life did not become easy because water returned. Food was still scarce. Winter would make travel difficult. Soldiers still watched some passes. The syndicate still owned influence in the towns. But thirst no longer decided every hour. That difference gave people room to plan. Clara joined the council after breakfast. A hide map lay across a low stone table. She had marked the deep river in charcoal, the camp in ochre, and a possible diversion toward Ocotillo wells in blue pigment made from crushed mineral. The proposed channel did not begin at the sacred cave. That was essential. It began 2 miles downstream at a natural split where excess water already entered a shallow limestone basin during high flow. From there, a narrow trench could guide part of the water toward lower ground without reducing the camp's supply below a safe level. Cochise studied the route. "How much?" he asked. "Enough for households and animals if the town stops wasting it on mining wash." The elder said, "And if they do not stop? We close the lower gate. Who controls the gate?" Clara looked around the circle. "Not me alone. 2 people from here, 2 from town, and 1 neutral keeper. Any change requires agreement." The elder grunted. "You learned distrust quickly. I had a good teacher." Cochise knew she meant Elias, not him. The council debated for most of the morning. Some opposed sharing any water with Ocotillo wells. Their anger was earned. Families had died or moved because the upper creeks failed, while townsmen watched ranches collapse and bought land cheaply. Clara did not argue that everyone deserved forgiveness. She argued from survival. "If the town believes its only water comes by taking this source," she said, "another Vance will always find men willing to follow him. If families have a legal, visible share that depends on respecting the upper valley, they become a reason for the town to protect the agreement." A younger warrior asked, "You trust their law now?" "No. I trust competing interests." Cochise's eyes warmed with amusement. Clara continued, "The syndicate wanted monopoly. We make monopoly impossible. The town drinks, but it cannot own. The camp controls its source, but it does not have to defend every cup with a rifle." The elder tapped the map with 1 finger. "And if they break the agreement?" Clara pointed to the gate location. "Then gravity remembers who is upstream." That ended the argument more effectively than another speech. 2 days later, Clara rode to Ocotillo Wells for the first time since leaving it. Cochise came with her, along with 2 elders and 4 scouts who waited outside town. Clara wore a plain buckskin dress and a wool shawl. Her hair was braided. She carried Jedediah's ledger and 3 copies of the proposed water terms written in her own hand. As the town appeared, her stomach tightened. The buildings had not changed. That surprised her. She had expected the place to look smaller or darker or somehow marked by what happened. The trading post still leaned toward the road. The same broken sign turned in the wind. The pump behind the store squealed. People noticed her immediately. A woman carrying flour stopped in the street. 2 men outside the blacksmith shop went silent. A boy ran toward the post, probably to tell Jedediah. Clara's mare slowed as if sensing her tension. Cochise rode beside her but did not reach for her reins. "You can turn back," he said. "No, then breathe." She gave him a look. "That is annoyingly simple advice. It works on horses." Despite herself, she smiled. They stopped outside the trading post. Clara dismounted. The porch board where she had last heard Elias call her name creaked under her boot. Inside, the room smelled exactly as she remembered. Tobacco, old wood, dried corn, coffee cooked too long. But the card table was gone. In its place stood a long meeting table made from fresh pine. Jedediah came from behind the counter. "Clara." She looked toward the spot where her ring had fallen. The floor had been swept and repaired. Nothing remained. "Where's the faro table?" she asked. "Chopped it for stove wood." Why? Jedediah shrugged. "Bad furniture." They both knew that was not the whole answer. Representatives from the town arrived over the next half hour. The blacksmith, a ranch widow, a school teacher, 2 shopkeepers, the new acting marshal, and a lawyer sent by the territorial office. No syndicate officers attended. Their absence did not mean they had disappeared, only that the ledger had made public association with them inconvenient. Clara stood at the head of the table. A year earlier, she would have hated the attention. Even a church committee of 6 people could make her hand shake if Elias sat nearby waiting for her to say something strange. Now she spread the map flat. The upper source will remain under Chiricahua protection, she said. No claim, deed, mineral right, rail charter, or town ordinance changes that. The proposed channel begins below the protected basin. The lawyer opened his mouth. Clara lifted a hand. You can object after the whole proposal. He closed it. Cochise leaned against the wall behind her, expression unreadable. Clara explained the gate, measurement schedule, labor requirements, and penalties. The town could use water for homes, livestock, public cisterns, and food gardens. Mining operations would require separate approval. No company could purchase individual shares. No person could sell a household allocation to a third party. If the flow fell below a marked level, the town allotment would decrease automatically before the upper source was threatened. The blacksmith rubbed his beard. Who decides the mark? I do the first survey with 2 witnesses from each side. After that, anyone can read the gauge. Anyone? That is the point. The school teacher looked at the map. You want every rule visible? Yes. Elias had taught her what hidden terms could do. The ranch widow asked, what does the upper camp receive? Labor on the channel. Iron tools at cost. Grain during poor harvests traded at posted rates. Medical supplies when available, and recognition that the source is not open land. The lawyer finally spoke. Recognition by whom? This town cannot settle federal questions. Cochise's gaze sharpened. Clara kept her voice calm. Then write what this town can settle. No local official, business, contractor, or citizen will assist any attempt to seize, dam, survey, or exploit the protected basin without council permission. That is unusually broad. So was starving a valley. Nobody argued with that. Negotiation lasted until the light outside turned orange. The final agreement was not perfect. No paper could guarantee the behavior of future men, but it was witnessed by people whose survival depended on it, and its mechanisms were physical as well as legal. The channel could be closed. The source could be hidden again. The map of the sacred ridge was not included. When the last signature dried, Jedediah brought coffee. Clara took one sip and made a face. You still make this terribly. For the first time that day, the room laughed. A sound came from the doorway. Clara turned. Elias stood outside. He looked thinner. His hair had been cut short. A healing scar marked his cheek where Vance struck him. He wore stable clothes and held his hat in both hands. The room quieted. Clara felt Cochise straighten behind her. Elias did not enter. Could I speak to you? He asked. Clara considered refusing. Then she walked onto the porch. Cochise remained inside where she could see him through the doorway. Elias stared at the street. Jedediah said you were coming. I assumed he would. I wanted to give you something. He took a folded paper from his coat. Clara recognized it before she opened it. Their marriage certificate. The document was stained and soft at the folds. Her name appeared near the bottom, written in the hand she used before marriage. Elias's signature followed. I had it in the cabin, he said. Vance's men searched the place after he left. I took what I could. Clara held the paper. Why give it to me? Because I don't know what else to do with it. She waited. Elias looked at her hands. I work at the stable now. I heard. I pay Jedediah a little each week. For what? Everything I owe him. What I can remember anyway. Clara nodded. I haven't gambled. That is good. He looked disappointed by the calmness of her answer. I keep thinking I should say something that makes you understand. I understand. No. I mean understand why I did it. I understand that too. His face tightened. You were afraid of being poor. Afraid of being ordinary. Afraid my abilities made your failures visible. You believed one lucky strike would turn you into the man you wanted to be. And every time it didn't happen, you needed another bet. Elias looked down. That sounds worse when you say it. It was worse to live with. He accepted that. After a moment he said, I'm sorry. This time he did not add a promise, excuse, or request. Clara noticed. Thank you, she said. He lifted his eyes, surprised. That does not mean I am coming back. I know. Does it? Took a slow breath. I'm learning. Clara folded the certificate again. Elias glanced through the doorway toward Cochise. Are you going to marry him? The question would once have angered her. Now it felt merely curious. I don't know what shape my life will take. Do you love him? Clara looked at Cochise. He was pretending to study a shelf of lamp oil with such seriousness that she nearly laughed. Yes, she said. Elias closed his eyes briefly. I thought so. I did not leave you because of him. I know that too. Good. A wagon rattled past. Elias put on his hat. I hope the water works. It will if people do. He gave a small, sad smile. You always did talk like that. No. I used to stop myself. His smile disappeared. That's true. He walked away toward the stable. Clara watched until he turned the corner. When she went back inside, nobody asked what had been said. Cochise only looked at the folded certificate in her hand. "Old map?" he asked. "Wrong kind." She slipped it into her pocket beside the childhood map. Construction on the town channel began the following week. Clara divided her time between the upper valley and the lower work site. The job was less dramatic than opening the deep river and in some ways more difficult. Miracles did not require schedules. Irrigation did. She marked the route with stakes. Town laborers dug while Chiricahua workers shaped stone gates. Arguments broke out over slope, depth, and who had taken which shovel. Clara learned to settle practical disputes by refusing to participate in pride. If the water runs uphill by insult, she told two men fighting over trench grade, continue. Otherwise, move the west side down 3 inches. They moved it. Cochise often rode with her but did not supervise. When he disagreed, he said so privately. When he thought a route exposed the workers to ambush, he showed her why. When Clara thought his preferred gate location would clog with silt, she made him stand ankle-deep in the channel while she demonstrated the current. "You enjoy being right," he said as mud soaked his leggings. "I spent years being told I was wrong. I am allowed a season." He laughed. Their closeness grew through work more than confession. He learned that Clara could forget meals when focused and began leaving food beside her maps without comment. She learned he became quieter when worried and would ask direct questions rather than waiting for him to speak first. He showed her how to repair a saddle girth, sharpen a knife without wasting steel, and read distant weather from cloud shape. She taught him to use a survey level and then complained when he became better at it than she expected. At night, they sat near fires with other people more often than alone. Clara came to understand that love did not require isolation to feel private. Sometimes Cochise's knee touched hers while a story was being told. Sometimes he passed her the better piece of roasted squash without looking. Sometimes he disappeared for 3 days with scouts and returned dusty, and Clara found herself angry at the relief she felt seeing him. The first time he kissed her, there was no dramatic storm. They had spent an entire day repairing a gate after a mule broke through wet timber. Both smelled of mud. Clara had a blister on her palm and a streak of clay across her nose. They sat beside the finished gate as evening cooled the rocks. Cochise looked at her for a long time. "What?" she asked. "You have mud here." He touched the side of her nose. "So do you." "Where?" "Everywhere." She wiped a streak from his cheek with her thumb. His hand closed lightly around her wrist. He waited. The pause mattered. Clara leaned forward first. The kiss was gentle, almost cautious. It lasted only a few seconds. When they separated, the gate beside them gave a small wooden creak as water pressed against it. Clara said, "If that breaks now, I will take it personally." Cochise laughed against her forehead. The town channel opened before winter. Water moved down the trench in a narrow, clear ribbon. People in Ocotillo Wells gathered around the public cistern as it filled. Clara watched from horseback at the edge of town. She saw women dip buckets, children touch the surface, men lead horses to troughs. Nobody cheered as loudly as she expected. The strongest reaction was relief, shoulders lowering, people standing less defensively, small calculations disappearing from faces. A mother washed dust from a baby's neck with more water than absolutely necessary. Clara understood that as celebration. Jedediah installed the public gauge outside the trading post where everyone could see it. The blacksmith built the metal parts for the control gate. The school teacher copied the agreement and read it aloud at a town meeting, so even those who could not read knew the terms. The syndicate challenged the arrangement through letters and lawyers. The territorial office delayed, objected, requested surveys, and lost documents. Clara answered with copies. She had learned to make copies. Months later, a ruling arrived suspending the company's contested water claims pending investigation of fraud tied to Vance's freight records. It was not a grand victory. It was a bureaucratic sentence on cheap paper. Clara treasured it. Winter changed the mountains. Snow remained in shaded pockets. The deep river ran darker and slower. Clara discovered that cold stone transmitted vibrations with a clarity that summer heat blurred. She spent mornings mapping new springs farther north and afternoons teaching children to keep simple records of flow. Some children were bored. This delighted her. Only a secure child could afford to find water measurements boring. One afternoon, the elder called Clara to the council circle. A new buckskin dress lay folded on the stone, decorated modestly with beadwork in patterns Clara had seen on water baskets. Nolly stood nearby, smiling too openly to pretend surprise. Clara looked from the dress to the elder. "What is this?" "A problem," he said. She waited. "You have been here through heat and cold. You found water, then you found work, which is more difficult. Children follow you into the dirt. Men argue with you and lose. You speak at council even when nobody asks." Nolly covered a laugh with her hand. The elder continued, "We require a name for this trouble." Clara folded her arms. "I already have one. Yes, Clara." He nodded. "Keep it, but a person may have more than one truth." He spoke a phrase in Chiricahua Apache, then translated its meaning with Cochise's help, "She who hears water before rain." Clara swallowed. She had feared being renamed. Men in institutions renamed people to claim them. Husbands changed women's names by law. Companies changed rivers into assets by putting new words on paper. This felt different because no one asked her to lose Clara. The new name was not a replacement. It was recognition. "Do I have to answer every time the children use it?" she asked. The elder considered. "No one has that much strength." Laughter broke the solemnity. Nolly helped Clara change into the dress. When she stepped outside, Cochise waited near the river. He looked at her and became completely still. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Say something." "I am trying to find a safe answer." "Coward." "I have learned from Elias that the wrong answer can cost a man greatly." She hit his arm. He caught her hand and kissed the knuckles. "I crossed a great deal of country hoping I would find you," he said. The old phrase no longer sounded like fate descending on her. It sounded like choice renewed. Clara answered, "You found me weeks ago." "No." His thumb moved across the back of her hand. "I found a woman leaving a trading post. Then I found a cartographer. Then a fighter. Then a teacher." "You keep changing the answer." "That sounds inconvenient." "It is," she smiled. "Good. In early spring, scouts found signs that a larger military patrol intended to enter the valley under the excuse of surveying the new watercourse. The news reminded everyone that agreements with towns did not protect them from every authority. The council considered moving deeper into the mountains before the patrol arrived. Clara spread her maps across the ground. For months she had been charting a basin beyond the northern pass, enclosed by 3 ridges and fed by a hidden waterfall. The approach crossed solid granite, then narrowed through 2 acoustic dead zones where a large group could move with little sound. There were meadows for horses and enough timber for winter shelters. Most important, the basin connected to the deep river system through a natural channel. "It can hold the families," she said. "Not forever without management, but long enough to establish another sanctuary." Cochise looked at her. "You have been planning this." "I plan everything, that is true." The elder asked, "Can the patrol follow?" If they know the exact pass, do they?" Clara looked at the childhood map still tucked in her pocket. It showed part of the route. For months she had carried it as a symbol of survival. Now it had become a risk. That night she sat by the communal fire with Cochise and unfolded the old paper for the last time. The charcoal marks were nearly gone. The map had survived sweat, rain, war, and years of folding. It had done more than any paper should be asked to do. Cochise understood before she spoke. "Yes, are you sure?" Clara traced the line that had once guided him home. "I used to think this proved I was not mad." "It never proved that." She looked at him. "It proved I was right about one path," she corrected. "I made the rest mean more because I needed evidence somebody could hold." She glanced toward the children sleeping near their families, toward the river, toward the tools stacked after a day of work. "I don't need it for that now." Cochise held the paper one last time. "You gave this to me when I had nothing. You kept it when you had every reason to hate people like me. I hated many people like you." Clara smiled. "Fair." He handed the map back. She placed it on the fire. The edge curled quickly. Charcoal lines brightened for a moment before turning black. The paper lifted in the updraft and broke into glowing fragments. Clara watched without grief. Cochise said, "Now how will we know the way?" She looked at him. "The route lives in me now." It sounded arrogant. It also happened to be true. The community moved 3 mornings later. Clara rode at the front on the bay mare the women had given her. Behind her came families, pack animals, elders, children, tools, food, and everything else a people could carry when history refused to let them remain still. Cochise rode to her left. Usually he led such movements. This time he did not. The first pass narrowed across loose rock. Clara chose a line where the underlying granite could bear the pack animals. At a fork, she listened to wind movement and took the western route. Near midday, she stopped the whole column. Because a hollow section beneath the trail had weakened after winter runoff, scouts found a safer crossing 50 yards uphill. Nobody questioned why she rode first after that. By late afternoon, they entered the hidden basin. The waterfall was smaller than Clara expected, but steady. It fell from a dark cleft into a pool surrounded by pine and willow. Grass covered the lower meadow, deer tracks marked the mud, children ran ahead until adults shouted them back. Nala stood beside Clara and looked across the basin. "You found another one." "We found it, no. I was carrying blankets." Clara laughed. Camp rose gradually from the meadow. Shelters appeared. Fires were lit, horses rolled in grass. The first evening smelled of pine resin, smoke, damp soil, and venison. Clara sat on a flat shelf of rock above the basin, adding the new channels to an elk-hide map. Cochise joined her. He looked down at the families settling below. "For years," he said, "I thought leadership meant knowing where to take people. And now, I think it sometimes means knowing who should ride in front." Clara continued drawing, though the compliment warmed her. He placed his hand over the edge of the map. "Stop working. There is still the northern drainage. It will exist tomorrow. You cannot know that. I am willing to risk it." She set the charcoal down. The sunset turned the basin copper and violet. Cochise took her hand. "I told you in the trading post that I had been looking for you. You have repeated that several times. I am old. We repeat ourselves. You are not that old. Then I have no excuse." She laughed. His expression grew serious. "I thought I was searching for the girl who saved my life. Then I thought I was searching for someone who could save the springs. Both were true, but neither was enough." Clara waited. "I was looking for a person who could see this land without wanting to own every part she understood." The wind moved across the meadow. He continued. "And I did not know I was also looking for someone beside whom silence would not feel empty." Clara looked down at their hands. Her first marriage had begun with a church promise and ended at a card table. She did not trust ceremony to create what daily behavior lacked. "What are you asking?" "That we build a life together." "We already are." "Yes." His eyes held hers. "I am asking that we name it." Clara thought of the certificate in her pocket. Elias's document still existed. Territorial law might still consider her married unless she sought an annulment or divorce. The idea of waiting for a distant judge to declare what was already true irritated her. But she also understood that the future could bring questions about property, children, and protection. "I want the legal end of my first marriage," she said. Cochise nodded. "Then get it. And after that?" "After that, you decide again." She smiled slowly. "You make it difficult to refuse you." "I am trying very hard to make it easy." That answer decided more than pressure ever could. Clara filed for dissolution through the territorial court using evidence of abandonment, fraud, and the attempted transfer of her labor for debt. Jedediah testified. The acting marshal confirmed Vance's conduct. Even Elias signed a statement admitting he had offered her service to satisfy gambling losses. The process took months. Clara hated every page. She also filled out every page correctly. When the final order arrived, she read it once beside the river, folded it, and put it with the marriage certificate. That evening she built a small fire outside the shelter. Cochise sat nearby sharpening a knife. Clara held up both documents. "Would you like to watch government paper perform its most useful function?" He looked at the fire. "Warmth? Exactly." She fed the old certificate to the flames first. The ink blackened. Elias's name disappeared. Her old signature curled inward. Then she burned the dissolution order too. Cochise raised an eyebrow. "You waited months for that." "I needed what it did, not what it was." The fire consumed the last edge. Clara looked at her bare left hand. The pale ring mark had faded completely. She flexed her fingers. No ghost remained. Their union was marked weeks later in the way that made sense to the people around them. A gathering, shared food, gifts, promises spoken in front of witnesses who knew what promises cost. Clara refused a metal ring. Instead, Nolly gave her a narrow woven band dyed with mineral blue and river green. Clara tied a matching strip around Cochise's wrist. No one called it ownership. The elder, however, gave a very long speech about patience, which Clara suspected was directed at Cochise. Their first home was not a house. It was a shelter built against a granite wall above the basin, expanded over time with timber and mud plaster. Clara insisted on a work table near the entrance where she could spread maps. Cochise insisted the roof not leak over the bed. They argued over the location of shelves. Clara won 2. Cochise won 1. Rain proved him correct about the roof. She never admitted it formally. Domestic life surprised Clara with its plainness. Love did not erase annoyance. Cochise left tools in places she considered impossible. Clara woke him before dawn when she felt unusual ground movement, and sometimes discovered it was only a herd crossing a distant ridge. He could disappear into silence when angry. She could turn an ordinary disagreement into a survey presentation complete with diagrams. They learned. When he needed quiet, he told her, rather than withdrawing without explanation. When she felt dismissed, she said so before resentment hardened. They apologized without attaching bargains. These habits felt less romantic than rescue and more miraculous. The hidden basin became a second stronghold. Clara mapped not only water but landslide zones, safe winter routes, places where smoke could escape without being seen from distant patrols, and acoustic corridors useful for warning systems. Children carried small drums between lookout points. A coded pattern could travel through the canyon faster than a rider. The system once used to frighten Vance's men became ordinary infrastructure. Years passed in work rather than legend. Ocotillo wells survived. The town channel required repair after floods and nearly became a source of conflict twice, but the shared committee held. Jedediah eventually stopped selling liquor on credit. The public pump was rebuilt. A small garden appeared behind the school. Elias remained in town for several years. Clara saw him only twice more. The first time he was repairing a wagon wheel when she came for iron fittings. He nodded. She nodded back. Neither needed more. The second time he told her he was leaving for California to work with a freight company. "I'm not prospecting," he added quickly. Clara smiled. "Good." He hesitated. "I heard you married, yes. Are you happy?" Clara considered the question. "Mostly." Elias laughed, genuinely this time. "That sounds more believable than yes." She laughed too. He left the next morning. Clara never heard from him again. Vance became a story people told with different endings. Some said he died in a saloon fight. Others claimed he changed his name and worked mines farther south. The exact truth ceased to matter. His power had depended on people believing he represented something larger than himself. Once the ledger exposed him and the badge left his chest, he became only a man who had made enemies. The land syndicate persisted longer. Companies did not feel shame and rarely died from one scandal, but they never regained control of the deep river. Clara made sure of that by refusing to keep its defense in one mind. She taught everything she could, not the private sacred roots that the council chose to protect, but the principles: how rock carried vibration, how water changed temperature, how to detect a hollow, how to read pressure, how to build a gauge, how to record seasonal flow. Some students were Chiricahua. Some were children from town who came under the water agreement. Clara insisted the classes mix whenever politics allowed. "The earth is not going to change density because your fathers dislike each other," she told them. A boy raised his hand. "Can fathers change density?" The class dissolved into laughter. Cochise heard the story that evening and repeated the boy's question for months whenever a council member became stubborn. Their daughter was born during a summer storm. Rain struck the shelter roof so hard that Clara could barely hear Nolly's instructions. Thunder rolled through the basin and mixed with the vibration of the ground until Clara's senses became useless. For once, she could not map anything. She hated it. Nolly told her to stop trying. Cochise waited outside because every woman present ordered him to. When the baby finally cried, the sound cut through storm, river, and thunder with impossible clarity. Clara held her against her chest and laughed from exhaustion. The child had dark hair, fierce lungs, and one tiny hand that closed around Clara's finger with astonishing force. Cochise entered only after permission was granted. He stopped beside the bedroll. Clara had seen him face rifles with less fear. "Come here," she said. He knelt. The baby opened her eyes. Cochise touched one finger to her cheek. "She is small. That is generally how they begin. What if I break her?" Clara stared at him, delighted. The man who walked into a trading post full of armed men is afraid of an 8-pound girl. "Yes, good. Perhaps you have sense after all." They named her Lila, a name easy in both English and Spanish-speaking settlements, and gave her a Chiricahua name through the family as well. As she grew, Lila proved energetic, impatient, and far more interested in animals than rocks. Clara tried not to be disappointed. At 4, the child could identify every horse in camp by hoofbeat but refused to sit still for geology lessons. At 6, she began noticing changes in springs before storms. Clara did not call it a gift. She did not want the child trapped by expectation any more than by shame. Instead, she asked, "What do you notice?" Lila learned to answer in her own words. One evening years after the trading post, Clara sat beside the deep river, while Lila and several other children splashed in the shallows. The valley looked nothing like the starving basin she first entered. Cottonwoods lined the creek, garden plots occupied terraces, water jars stood full beside shelters. The elder who had first challenged her had died the previous winter. A younger council now sat in his place, including Nolly. Clara's hair carried threads of gray at the temples. Cochise approached along the bank and sat beside her. He handed her a cup. She drank. Cold mineral water, still tasting faintly of iron and quartz. The same, he asked? No. He looked concerned. Clara smiled. I am, he understood. The river had always changed. Flow rose and fell. Channels shifted. Banks eroded. Springs opened and closed. Stability had never meant stillness. She had once believed becoming whole would feel like reaching a fixed place where nothing could hurt or change her. Instead, wholeness felt like this, the ability to change without being erased. Lila ran up the bank carrying a smooth stone. Mother, listen. She pressed it into Clara's palm. Clara felt a faint vibration through it from the current. What do you hear? She asked. Lila frowned. Not here. Feel Clara's throat tightened. What do you feel? The water hits the big rock and comes back. Cochise watched silently. Clara handed the stone back. Show me. Lila pulled her toward the stream. Clara followed. She did not tell the child that her grandmother had once watched a little girl feel the world differently and worried it would make her lonely. She did not tell her that a husband had called the same sensitivity madness. She did not place history on the child's shoulders before she was strong enough to choose what to carry. She simply listened. The years made Clara's name travel farther than she did. Ranchers spoke of a woman in the Chiricahua High Country who could find water by touching stone. Miners exaggerated until stories claimed she could hear gold whispering from miles away. Some called her a witch, others called her an engineer. A newspaper in Tucson described her as an eccentric frontier hydrologist, a term Clara found so pompous she cut out the article and used it to wrap dried herbs. The people who knew her best called her Clara. That pleased her most. She never became a queen in the way stories liked to tell it. There was no throne, no crown, no moment when everyone agreed she was right forever. She hauled water when gates broke. She sat through council arguments. She cleaned mud from children's boots. She made bad bread for years before improving. She lost maps to rain. She misjudged a spring once and spent 2 days helping move a camp after her mistake. Her authority grew because it survived being wrong. That was something Elias had never understood. He believed worth required the appearance of certainty. One failed prospect made him gamble harder because admitting error felt like death. Clara learned that a map could be corrected without destroying the cartographer. One autumn morning, she climbed the high pass above the basin alone. The air was sharp. Below, the desert stretched toward Ocotillo Wells, now barely visible in the distance. She could not see the old trading post clearly, only a pale cluster of roofs. Years earlier, that view would have stirred anger. Now she felt almost nothing. Not emptiness, distance. The woman who had stood in that room while Elias offered her as payment had expected humiliation to remain the central fact of her life. She assumed every future happiness would have to answer it. But life had become larger than the injury. The betrayal was still true. It simply was no longer the biggest truth. Cochise found her near midday. You left without telling me. You were asleep. That has never stopped you before. I am becoming considerate in old age. He sat beside her on the granite shelf. Below them, faint smoke marked the hidden basin. Farther south, the town channel traced a thin line of green vegetation across the flats. Cochise said, Do you remember the ring? Clara looked at him. Why? I passed through Ocotillo Wells yesterday. You did not tell me. You were asleep. She narrowed her eyes. He smiled. Jedediah is replacing the trading post floor. He found a silver ring between two boards. Clara looked toward the distant town. Mine? He thought so. What did he do with it? I told him I did not know. Did he send it? No, he asked. Clara considered the small circle of metal that had once seemed to contain her entire fate. Tell him to melt it. For what? She looked down at the green line of the town channel. A fitting for the public gauge. Cochise laughed. Practical. It should finally do useful work. Months later, Jedediah sent a small silver marker stamped into the gauge at Ocotillo Wells. It indicated the minimum safe flow for the town allotment. Most people who saw it never knew what the metal had once been. Clara preferred that. Symbols did not need to remain symbols forever. On the 20th anniversary of the Deep River's release, families gathered near the sacred cave. Some had been children during the drought. Some had been born after, and knew the old starvation only through stories. Clara stood before a group of young listeners with a drum at her feet. She did not tell them she had saved the mountain. She told them men had blocked water because they believed control was the same as strength. She told them a community nearly died because too many people accepted dry creek beds as fate. She told them that knowledge without shared responsibility could become another form of ownership. Then she placed a child's hand on the ground and struck the drum once. The vibration traveled through stone. "What did you feel?" she asked. Answers came from every direction. Clara smiled. Cochise watched from beneath a cottonwood. Older now, hair touched with gray, Lila stood beside him, nearly grown, listening with the serious expression she wore when pretending not to be proud of her mother. The river moved behind them. It had cut its channel deeper over the years. Its banks carried willow and grass. Water insects hovered over the surface. A heron stood in the shallows where once there had been only dust. Clara ended the lesson without a speech. She never liked speeches. She simply told the children to go find 3 different stones and return with what each one did to sound. They scattered. Cochise came to her. "You could have told them the part where you defeated 15 armed men with 2 drums. They already know. Their parents make it worse every year. I heard there were 50 men last time. Next winter it will be a regiment, and you will have done it with 1 hand. I probably did." He took her hand, the left one, bare except for years of work. The gesture remained simple after all that time. Clara looked toward the cave entrance. Deep behind it, water still moved through stone. She could feel the pressure faintly through the soles of her boots, familiar as her own pulse. Once, that sensation had made her wonder whether something was wrong with her. Then Elias used her doubt as proof that he should decide what was real. Then Vance saw the same ability and wanted to own it. Cochise had been the first man to meet it with respect, but even he had not given Clara her worth. That distinction mattered. He had given her room to recognize what was already there. The rest had been work, her work, their work. The mountain did not speak in words. It never told Clara what choices to make. It offered pressure, density, echoes, changes in temperature, the physical consequences of what had been done to it. Meaning came later, from human hands. Clara had finally learned the difference. She squeezed Cochise's fingers. Lila called from the riverbank, demanding help with a stone that sounded wrong. Clara sighed theatrically. "Our daughter believes every unusual rock is an emergency." Cochise stood. "I wonder where she learned that." Clara pushed him lightly toward the path. They walked down together. The afternoon sun lay warm on the canyon walls. Smoke from cooking fires drifted between cottonwoods. Someone pounded corn. A dog barked at children near the water. From the lower trail came the creak of a wagon bringing grain from town under the old agreement. Ordinary sounds. For Clara, that was the final proof of what had been saved. Not a legend. Not a kingdom. Not a man who arrived in a doorway at exactly the right moment. A life large enough to become ordinary. She stepped into the shallows beside her daughter. Cold water covered her boots. Lila placed the strange stone in her hand. Clara closed her fingers around it and listened. The river pressed against the far side, struck submerged granite, and returned a faint trembling through the current. There it was, a path hidden inside another path. Clara smiled. "Feel that?" she asked. Lila nodded. "What does it mean?" Clara looked toward Cochise, toward the families beyond him, toward the high ridges that had once seemed like walls and now felt like the edges of a home built by choice. "It means," she said, "we keep listening.